Hello and welcome to the JAGGY THISTLE Podcast. My name's Kenny Farquharson, talking to you today from my study in the north of Edinburgh. I try not to go to the south of Edinburgh. I try not to cross that line, try not to cross the line of the demarcation line of Princess Street. You know, I like to stay in the north. That's where I'm comfortable. That's where my comfort zone is. You don't know who you're going to meet if you cross the line into South Edinburgh. It's a strange place, strange people. You don't know who you're going to meet. There be dragons. So I'm here in my comfort zone, in my study in the north of Edinburgh, just where I like it and just how I like it. And so I'm welcoming you to this podcast. We're going to talk about the SNP today. The JAGGY Thistle. As I said, we talk about Scottish culture and Scottish politics. And today we're looking at the SNP conference that's just finished in Aberdeen and trying to make sense of it. What the hell went on and what should we draw from it? And as we look forward to the Holyrood elections that are only now less than 7 months away. Time flies. So SNP in Aberdeen, what did we learn? Well, we learned that John Swinney, the First Minister and the SNP leader, he has a secret plan, okay? John has a secret plan to deliver independence, okay? What is the secret? He can't tell you because it's a secret. Why is it a secret? He can't tell you that either because that too is a secret. It's all very, very secretive. And the message seems to be that we have to trust John Swinney, that in the event of an SNP win in the Holyrood elections, if the SNP win a majority of seats in the Scottish Parliament, then John Swinney will have a cunning plan to parlay that into a referendum on independence for Scotland. Quite how he's going to do that, nobody knows. Does he know? Well, that's an interesting question. Perhaps he does, perhaps he doesn't, but we don't know because it's a secret. This is not good. Basically, this is not a plan you can kind of go to the people with. We're going to have to hear a little bit more about John's secret plan, I think, before polling day. Otherwise, he's asking a lot of people to kind of vote in the belief that their illustrious leader will they've not to worry their pretty little heads about the details, because John will get us there. John will bring Scotland to independence via his secret route, for which only he has a map. This isn't going to wash in the heat of an election campaign and TV debates and what have you. He will be ridiculed if that's his position heading up to May next year. And this was the flaws in this independence strategy were laid bare by the SNP's own delegates in Aberdeen. By some delegates barely old enough to shave were forensically unpicking this plan. And one of the main flaws was quite brutally forensically analysed by delegates at the conference during the debate on independence, including the Swinney belief that he can repeat the precedent, as he called it, of 2011, when David Cameron looked at the majority, the SNP majority in the newly elected Scottish Parliament, and agreed that Scotland should have a referendum on independence. That's what happened with the Edinburgh Agreement in the following year, 2012, and that led to the independence referendum in 2014. Swinney's belief, or Swinney's assertion, is that set a precedent, and a future British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, for example, faced with the similar circumstances, would have to do the same thing because it's a precedent. And delegates at the SNP's own conference pointed out that no, That's just not how it works, because you can have a political precedent, something that's happened that a politician has done in the past. Doesn't mean to say that a future politician has to do the same thing many years later. Now that's very different from a legal precedent. A legal precedent that's from the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court, or from the Scottish High Court. Something that sets a legal precedent is something that has to be contended with and dealt with seriously. But a political precedent doesn't commit a future politician to anything, frankly. And, regardless of this, Swinney has got his independent strategy through, and it's now party policy as we head into the election. And by any other measure, that should have been the big story of the conference, the big takeaway from conference. This mess basically, which is obviously a compromise to keep the indie diehards on the team as they head forward. But for me, that wasn't the takeaway from conference. That was a mess. But the broader picture, if you kind of zoom out, take a moment to kind of zoom out a little bit. What's the bigger picture away from this kind of the detail of the constitutional plans, the constitutional machinations? What's the bigger picture here? The bigger picture here is that the SNP alone, in all the parties facing the Holyrood, heading up to the Holyrood election, actually has a coherent, thought-through plan, quite a compelling plan, quite a compelling offer to make to the Scottish people for the Holyrood elections, and that plan looks likely to succeed. At this point, given where the polls are, given the chaos in the other parties, and more importantly, given the likely dynamic as we move over the next 7 months, what's likely to happen, I think the SNP are on track to win. The Holyrood election is John Swinney's to lose. And I'll explain why I think that is. The SNP approach to the Holyrood election has 3 component parts. And I'm going to go through them in this podcast, just talking about them and just to demonstrate my belief that the SNP are in pole position here and unlikely to lose that pole position. The first part of the strategy is that Swinney is trying to be the anti-Farage. Okay? Now, Labour and the Tories are still struggling with a dilemma. They are trying to win across the voters that are attracted to Farage because of his stance on immigration and a number of other things. So they're trying to kind of develop policies that will address some of those concerns, legitimate concerns in many cases, about immigration and small boats and refugees. They're trying to do that while at the same time trying to demonise Farage and Reform UK. And they haven't got that right yet. They haven't quite got the right, they haven't figured out their messaging in a way to do that convincingly. It looks like they're facing in 2 directions at once, and they're struggling to get their act together on this. John Swinney has no such problem, okay? John Swinney can look the Scottish people in the eye and say that, we, the SNP, are pro-immigrant. We, the SNP, are pro-refugees. I used a phrase which I thought was really interesting. Often the SNP can get into a bit of a fankle when they talk about flags. It kind of brings out some of their worst instincts. But Swinney had a good phrase about the saltire. He said that people could be assured that when they came to Scotland, they could live under a saltire that flutters proudly but gently. That was quite nicely done, don't you think? Kind of, given all the kind of discourse about, St George's crosses painted on roundabouts and also saltires going up in various places in this central Scotland and in the northeast, and the people who are putting these up and what their motives were, it's a fascinating subject, and we'll maybe get into that in a future podcast. But Swinney here is talking about the saltire flying proudly but gently. That's an interesting position, and one I think will probably feature in the SNP campaign as we go forward. So Swinney can pitch himself as the anti-Farage, okay, at a time when British politics is moving to the right on some of the key issues that reform has at the core of its offer to the voters. So Swinney as the anti-Farage is the first element of the strategy. The second element is independence. Independence is back, baby, as an issue. If you read Nicola Sturgeon's biography, her memoir, frankly, independence is always a headache. It's that she talks about the trouble she had trying to persuade the diehards in her party of the very real legal obstacles that were in the way of Scotland holding another referendum on independence. And it was clearly a headache that she had throughout her time as First Minister and SNP leader. But now independence has been transformed into an opportunity for the new leader, John Swinney, because it addresses a deep problem for the SNP, which is that the SNP has been hit by reform. It's a quite a number of percentage points down on where it was, say, a year or so ago. But the great thing for the SNP is that that's okay as long as Labour and the Tories are losing even more voters than the SNP is. As long as Labour and the Tories are losing more voters than the SNP to reform, the SNP doesn't really have to worry about reform. Okay, so and one of the things one of the problems though that this reduction in support has caused. SNP support is now about a third of the electorate, but support for independence is about half the electorate. So by making the next election about independence, Swinney hopes to close that gap, to convince some of the independent supporters who are not currently intending to vote for the SNP to come back to the fold, because this election is the election in which a Scotland which is appalled at the rightward drift of the UK is going to declare its intention to exit the UK, to break up Britain, because of the rightward drift that may well deliver Nigel Farage to Downing Street, if the polls are correct. And that's a not inconsiderable offer to the Scottish people. The idea of Farage in Downing Street is not an attractive one. And it may be the message of, do you really want this man as your Prime Minister, is quite a compelling one for a section of the Scottish electorate. It remains to be seen whether it will increase the numbers that vote who want independence, but it may well increase the numbers of people who want to vote SNP, who are independent supporters. So that's the second element of the plan: independence at the front and centre of SNP strategy, not for its own sake, but for a functional reason, a functional electoral reason that could bump up the SNP support and secure them another 5 years in power at Holyrood. Then there's a third element, okay? And the third element is to punch the bruise of the Labour Party's pains, the Labour Party's injuries in Scotland. A bit of a horrible phrase that. I'm kind of, should I be using the language of violence in discussing politics like this? Perhaps that's a debate for another day. But SNP wants to punch the bruise of Labour's troubles over the last year and a half in power, and it will Swinney will relentlessly remind people that their hopes for this Labour government have at very best not been realised and perhaps been dashed by a whole range of issues, the failure to address child poverty, the budget decisions which were detrimental to employment and wages, the decision on cold weather payments for the elderly, all kinds of issues which Labour are struggling to remedy at the moment. Now, some of these may be remedied in the budget. By then, it may be too late. The die will have been cast in people's minds that this is not a government which is on their side. That's certainly the hope of Swinney, and he's already started this. What we'll call the Punch the Bruise tour. This week he has flown to Malawi and Zambia to look at the Scottish Government's international aid programme. Scottish Government's international aid programme started by Jack McConnell, the Labour First Minister, back in, I think it was 2003, around about then, with £3 million at the time, largely in the areas of Africa with a history of connections to Scotland and Scottish missionaries, often who were the people who made those connections back in Victorian times. So it was controversial at the time. I remember one of McConnell's aides telling me that it was one of the things that they were most proud of, but it was also one of the things that they struggled to sell on the doorsteps. But regardless of that, it was something that they were very proud of. But Labour, in an attempt to get money for the armed forces to meet the Russian threat, have reduced the amount of money that they're spending on international aid. And the SNP is going to highlight that and say that this is not this is not what we should expect from a government that is that cares about the world, cares about our place in the world, and cares about doing good in the world. I think you can also expect to see Swinney. He announced what I thought was a very interesting policy in his speech. He said that the Scottish Government would sponsor the visas of Scottish care workers, people who are struggling to get their visas extended, and they would be sponsored by the Scottish Government to continue working in Scotland's care homes and nursing homes. Now, I think we haven't seen the detail of this, but it could be very interesting. It could be the start of something that is broader. It could be the start of something which meets resistance from the Home Office, which might well resent the fact that the Scottish Government is trying to decide who stays in the UK. The Home Office very, very tetchy about their role as the guardians of Britain's borders, and might not like another player, such as the Scottish Government, being an arbiter of who gets to stay and who gets to go. So this is going to be a fascinating fight, I think. So we'll watch this one with interest. So those are the three elements of the SNP strategy. There was Swinney being the anti-Farage, independence being used as an electoral weapon, and thirdly, punching the bruise. Every time I say it, I don't like it. I'll try and stop. Punching the bruise of Labour's failings in government, and this feeds into a broader picture as well, which is to the SNP's advantage. Swinney used the phrase "broken Britain," and I think this is a deep problem for Keir Starmer and the Labour government, because all of the parties that oppose him, Reform, the Tories, SNP, all the main opposition parties to him in power, believe that Britain is broken. And they act on that assumption, and they put forward remedies that are of a scale equal to the seriousness of that task. But Starmer spent much of his speech in Liverpool denying that Britain was broken, that it was only in need, he said, of renewal, which kind of begs the question, if it's not broken, then why does it need renewed? And I think this is it's more than semantics here. I think this is a problem which is about, it's kind of a core problem about how you see Britain, how you see the challenges and threats we face, and how serious is the shit we are in, basically, which then feeds into how radical do you have to be to get us out of this shit. And just now, there's a sense of denial, I think, in the Prime Minister's position, which could come back to haunt him, because the polls show, crucially, that an overwhelming majority of people in this country, in the United Kingdom, believe Britain is broken. So, if they believe Britain is in crisis, and Starmer is saying crisis, what crisis, echoing the famous Jim Callaghan phrase, which Callaghan never used in the late 1970s, that's a problem for Labour. There's a mismatch there between the Britain that he sees and the Britain that Britain sees. And he has to remedy that. He has to reconcile those two. Whether he does it in time for the Scottish Parliament elections next year, I doubt it. So the problem will still be extant at that stage. And of course, in a Scottish context, the idea that Britain is broken has another aspect, because the SNP is arguing that Britain is so broken that we should actually break up Britain and let Scotland go its own way with independence. So that's an issue which is I think creating a climate in which the SNP can thrive. So there we are. That's us facing the Holyrood elections with the SNP, I think, in a pole position. So what can happen between now and May to change that? Now, Anas Sarwar, the Scottish Labour leader, who I think is looking increasingly beleaguered at the moment, his belief, and I've spoken to him about this, his belief is that the closer we get to May, the more people will kind of switch on to the fact that this is a Scottish Parliament election, and it's about their children's education, and it's about the care homes that their grannies are in, and it's about the state of their hospitals and the GP services, and it's about crime on their streets, and it's about the environment, and it's about the economy, and that people will want answers from the SNP, and that people won't want to give the SNP, after with their record on public services, a third decade in power. And I get how that makes sense to him. I can see how that makes sense to the Labour Party, but I think it ignores the dynamic of where we're heading in this campaign. And the reality is going to be, by the time you get to next April, in the thick of the campaign, before the weeks before polling day, all the UK media is going to want to talk about is Farage. Okay, so the UK broadcast media is all going to be about one question: in Scotland, Wales, London, and in the English regions, is there going to be a huge Farage wave, a Reform UK wave, which causes problems for the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition? Will it cause so many problems for Starmer and Badenoch that that there is a threat to their leadership. And that's quite an understandable framing for a UK broadcaster or a UK newspaper with which to view the next May's elections. You know, could it possibly bring about the resignation of the Prime Minister or the resignation of the leader of the opposition? You know, those are high stakes. Of course, for us here in Scotland, there are other stakes. It's about our public services, how we are governed on a day-to-day basis for the next 5 years. But I think it's naive, frankly, of Labour, Scottish Labour, to think that we will suddenly be in a debate about AI in schools or about, you know, whether we have too many health boards or should we be having small-scale nuclear power plants in Scotland. You know, the debates we should be having, in fact, debates which are essential for us to have in Scotland if we're to be governed better and to have many of our problems addressed. These are big issues and issues which we will return to between now and May. But the idea that it's going to be anything other than a big election dominated by Nigel Farage and Reform UK, I think is for the birds. I really do think that that's naive. And I think the SNP's strategy, which has Farage at its heart, is a recognition of reality and is far more going to be in tune with where we're going to be next spring as we head for the election. So that's my take on the SNP conference. There'll be lots more we can get into between now and April. If you got this far, well done, congratulations. You might want to press I'd be grateful if you press the like button or subscribed. You can get these podcasts on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. You can get them on YouTube with video, God help us. You can watch them on the Substack mobile app or on the Substack website. If you're new to the Jaggy Thistle, please follow us. We are a Substack newsletter about Scottish politics and Scottish culture. And you can learn a little bit more about me and my background and what I bring to this to these chats, the experience I've got in Scottish media over the last 30 odd years. And you know, please let me know what you think. There will be various places you can add comments, and you can question what I'm saying, agree with what I'm saying, or disagree. Or give me your own perspective as on what we've been saying. What do you make of the SNP conference and the SNP's position at this stage? And with that, thank you very much. Greatly appreciate you sticking with me to the end. Have a good day, and I'll speak to you again soon.